So I guess yesterday we left somewhere at logical independence um, of nature law school. That essentially, I think we discussed that yesterday. But anyway, that essentially means that there are two different ways of understanding this problem. Some say that moral questions which might exist will not depend on some kind of logical calculation. That moral questions are not calculative in nature, they are morally objective, so it wouldn't depend on other you know uh, calculations. Okay. Whereas there are other moralists, nature law thinkers, okay, who say that, who believe that in fact it is that logical you know way of thinking that takes us exactly to moral conclusions. Now who they are and what do they specifically say, we will discuss that later on when we take up specific thinkers. So that's essentially what logical dependence or independence is all about when it comes to your nature law. Then another important feature of natural law is that the questions of morality are objectively true, also known as moral. The approach also known as moral objectivism. That essentially means that moral questions will have one uniform answer at all places, at all times. Okay. So that's essentially the idea of moral objectivism. Moral objectivism means what? It's either true or it's false. Okay, we cannot have, okay, it's true according to me, it's not true according to me for someone else, again true for someone else, it's not true. No, there cannot be differences of opinion when it comes to all these moral questions. So at least the moral objectivists believe in this idea, and natural law is all about, essentially about moral objectivism, that it does not depend on A, B, C, D thinking this or that. Okay, as I said, it's independent of human will, it's independent of convention. Okay, conventions can emerge differently in different societies, different cultures. Okay, whereas natural law will be uniform, whether you are in India or in Pakistan or in United States of America or in Chile, or if someday we dwell on Mars, then it will be the same there as well. So that's the idea of objectivism, that we are talking about here. Whereas there are others, okay, who are moral relativists. Okay, who are moral relativists. Now, what is that? They now question then arises as to whether moral relativism is even possible. Now, what is moral objectivism? It's unlike so what is moral realism? It's quite opposite to moral objectivism. Moral objectivism says that you will have one right answer everywhere at all time on all places, no matter who. Moral relativism would say that you can come to different conclusions. Okay, so with regard to the same subject matter, okay, different people can have different moral truths. Okay, so what would be the implication of such a way of thinking? So I will always say that what you are saying is not justified, then you will say that what you are saying is not justified. Whereas relativists would say that no, this is something that is important in the sense that then no one will have this sense of superiority over others. Okay, that we all have to respect each other's moral calculations and the conclusions that we come to. But for me, if you ask me what my position is, I think that's little problematic. Okay, you may have certain disagreements on certain issues, but on other issues which are of serious implication. Okay, I gave you guys certain examples. I think the question of relativism doesn't apply there. We ought to have a morally objective answer to those questions. Okay, So whether genocide is justified or not, whether rape, can be justified or not. So, or whether, pedophilia can be justified or not. On all these cases, on all these questions, I do not think we have much room for disagreement. Okay. Now, I think it will not be justified on the part of, any particular community to claim that, okay, it's within our, cultural practices that, men gets to steal women away and then forcefully say, have sexual intercourse with her, and that's the idea of marriage in our community. So you can't criticize because this is our practice, and so this is morally acceptable in our universe. So to me, if you were to ask, I think this is little problematic. So I personally do not subscribe to this idea of moral relativism. In fact, natural law school doesn't subscribe to that. Okay, it says that we need to have morally objective, moral objectivism, or there has to be a moral truth which is the same everywhere. So I hope this is clear to you so far, this idea of moral objectivism and moral relativism, and that natural law is not about moral relativism but about moral objectivism. So was I clear in my explanation? Okay. So yes, that's essentially the idea of moral objectivism is all about. So that's why we say that that natural law is not dependent on either independent will of a sovereign or of the collective will of a particular community, because if it were about independent will of an individual, it will vary, okay, from individual to individual and time to time, and it will not commensurate with the idea of naturalness of natural law that we just discussed. At the same time, natural law will also be not about collective will, because it's not a matter of a group of person deciding this or that, okay, because these are all objectively true. Okay, so the problem still remains as to how do we arrive at the morally objectively right decision. So I'm not getting into all that yet, okay, because that's essentially the domain of serious philosophical analysis, and for this subject I don't know if I'll be able to do justice to that, because that will require a lot of time, but I can only introduce those ideas to you, and some of them I will. So yes, standards of morality is derived from the nature of the world and nature of human being, as I said. Okay, so this is one of the approaches, though not everyone necessarily subscribe to this idea. Anyway, you can say that the earliest understanding of natural law in the Greco-Roman times, when it was essentially based on this doctrine of teleology, I'll come to that later on, was that we derive natural law not from subjective will of an individual or of a group of persons. No, it is to be derived from the nature of the world. Now, when they say nature of the world, what do they mean? They essentially mean that the world is not purposeless. Okay, the world is not purposeless. Okay, the world exists for some purpose, and everything tries to achieve certain purpose that exists behind its existence. Okay, so and nothing is without a purpose. Everything has a higher purpose, and then we exist for the sake of achieving those purposes, okay, in life. Okay, not just to me, it also applies in the teleological thinking to every object around you. Okay, I will explain that in detail later on. So because things have a purpose, okay, from that, if you are able to identify that purpose, From that, you will be able to trace what is the right or wrong thing to do. So, so that's why it's not dependent on me or you thinking that or this, but essentially dependent on nature of the world itself. And also that, the same thing can be also applied to humans. So humans also have a certain purpose, okay? We also possess certain natures, okay? What are those natures? We'll discuss that later on. So one nature definitely is that human beings are rational creatures, okay? We are rational beings. Unlike other creatures, that distinction is quite often drawn. Um, Human beings are supposed to be rational, of rational nature, okay? So it is expected that, hence the moral proposition that we all ought to act rationally. Now you will see that here's a thing that happens here, okay, and that's essentially a problem that we will deal with later on. So there's ought propositions here, okay, that you ought to behave this way, you ought to behave that way, okay, which is duty oriented, okay, duty based, okay. So these ought propositions are derived from some other, uh, factual account of the world, okay. For example, human beings are rational, okay, so this is quite factual, it's observational. Then you can observe what is the nature of the world, so those will be descriptive, factual. So facts are quite often described in the sense of ease, whereas moral propositions that nature law deals with are in the form of ought. So there's a criticism that we will study later on that says that we cannot derive an ought from an is, okay. So how do nature law thinkers, for example in this case, at least from this perspective, arrive at ought proposition from a description of the world, okay. But there are others who say that we can arrive at ought from ought proposition from an is, okay. So we'll discuss all that in much greater detail later on. So am I clear so far? Am I making sense to you guys? Am I moving too fast? Okay. Okay then, I will proceed. Okay. So yes, as I said, so that's one of the ways in which we can define, uh, nature law. Now, what's the, another important question that we need to look at, okay, is that what is the relationship between this idea of natural law that we talk about, okay, with that of law that, for example, a lawyer or student of law talk about, okay, what's the connection between these two, okay. Now, here we have to make look at two different approaches within natural law school, okay, two different approaches within natural law school, okay, or two different theories within natural law school. Those are natural law moral theory and natural law legal theory, okay. So on the one hand you have natural law moral theory, and on the other hand you have natural law legal theory. Now, what is the distinction between these two? So, natural law moral theory is essentially what we tried to discuss introductorily here, preliminarily here, okay? That it tries to tell us the answers to certain moral questions as to what is the right thing to do, what is right and what is wrong, okay? So, as long as our inquiry is all about finding out what is right and what is wrong, what is what is justice, okay, moral justice and all that, what you are doing is you are dealing with natural law moral theory, okay. On the other hand, you have something called natural law legal theory. So now natural law legal theory says that that essentially that laws have to have moral content, okay. Laws have to have moral content, okay. Quite often laws are amoral in the sense that there is neither, moral or immoral about them. Okay, so for example, the laws in India, you know, the traffic laws says that, that we are to drive on the, left side of the street. Okay, in some other countries, you find that, people there are to drive on the right side of the street. Okay. Now, is there anything morally objectionable about, driving on the left side or driving on the right side? In most of the cases, in most laws, these moral questions do not arise. Okay. So the problem doesn't really apply in those cases, but in others, they definitely do. Okay. So on those matters where, they do, that's where the importance of natural law legal theory emerges. Okay, so what about laws which are immoral? Okay, so a natural law moral theory tells you what are the standards of right, wrong, okay, morality. And then natural law legal theory says that laws have to be moral. Okay, so they essentially say that a law which is not moral in its content, okay, a law which is unjust is not a law. Okay, now there are different degrees of this, rule. Okay, some say that a law which is unjust is not a law at all. Others say that, okay, it depends on degrees of unjustness and all those. Okay, so there are variations within that. But essentially, natural law legal theory encompasses this, okay, and says that the laws have to have moral content, okay, and if the law is immoral, then the law is not valid. So legal validity of law depends essentially on the moral content. Okay, so yes, that's essentially the two idea. Okay, so now these two theories are not logically connected. That you can subscribe to natural law moral theory, and then you may not subscribe to natural law, legal theory. On the other hand, it is also possible that you subscribe to natural law, legal theory, and do not subscribe to natural law moral theory. So logically, there is no connection. But then, I mean, there is definitely though, okay, that you can deal with natural law legal theory on the one hand, okay, without subscribing to any particular moral theory, and then you can also deal with, natural law moral theory in the sense that you trace those objective moral principles without getting into the business of natural law legal theory. But quite often you see in many thinkers' works, okay, you will see that most of the people, okay, most of the philosophers who work on, natural law moral theory have also a lot to say about natural law legal theory, in the sense that once they identify what is moral and what is immoral, they also say what is the implication of that particular theory on law. So yes, there is an overlap between these two that happens quite often. Okay, what that essentially means is that there is an overlap, okay, between law and morality. That law and morality, whether apart from, like, despite the differences of degrees, okay, those who subscribe to this overlap thesis say that they intersect in some way. Okay, they intersect in some way. So what does that mean? That laws, they essentially say that laws have to have certain moral content. Okay, if the laws do not have moral content, then it is not law. Now, what does that mean? Then it is not law. Some say that it has to be absolutely in tandem with those moral propositions. Others would say that it depends on the degree of variance. Okay, so to what degree does it, stray away from those moral principles? So if it is too egregious, then you have a moral obligation to disobey the law, to not obey the law. But if it is of lesser degree, that doesn't really matter much. So for example, someone being fined more than he ought to be, so in such case, non-following the law will have higher moral consequence, and hence it is a moral responsibility that you follow the law. So anyway, I'm not going into all those greater details now. We will take them up when we take up specific thinkers. So that's the essential overlap between the natural law moral theory on the one hand and natural law legal theorist on the other. So to give you an example, so we will study Thomas Aquinas later on, who talks about four different kinds of laws. So you have lex aeterna, the eternal laws. Then you have next lex naturalis, that is natural law. Then alongside that you have lex divina, or laws which are revealed in the scriptures. And then you have lex humana, that is man-made laws. Okay, now he says that they are in that order, that lex humana, okay, human made laws have to be in tandem with, have to be in accordance with the lex naturalis and the divina, okay, lex divina. Okay, and then those laws are definitely according to lex aeterna. Okay, so now what are they? I will go into greater detail later on, but what he is essentially saying here is that human laws have to be in accordance with lex naturalis and ultimately lex aeterna. So that means an law has to be just. An unjust law will not be a law. But then to what degree, we will discuss that later on. So yes, that's the case of overlap. But then there are others. So for example, John Austin is a philosopher who's known, mistakenly or otherwise known as the father of legal positivism. Okay, he also has views about both these different approaches. Okay, so he talks about natural law, legal theory. He also talks about he talks about legal theory on the one hand. Okay, his entire legal positivism is about legal theory, but he also has a natural law. He also has this idea of natural law moral theory. Okay, so he was an utilitarian, so he had certain things to say about what is moral and what is immoral. But then he also created a legal theory that was logically independent of the other. So according to him, whether something is a law or not will depend on whether it fulfills the requirements of the definition of law that he had given. Now that's, according to him, not an arbitrary definition. I'm just introducing these topics. Okay. Now the question of whether something is law or not will not depend on anything else but that concept that he has developed. Okay. But that doesn't mean that he denies the existence of natural law moral theory. But he's simply saying that whether something is law or not does not, for us to answer that question, we do not need to look into natural law, into other moral considerations. So yes, so you have another thinker who, in whose case there is no overlap. Okay, his both approaches are quite separate. So I hope you guys are clear with these two things. Okay, am I clear so far? These are preliminary though, so don't worry too much. But if there was anything that I could not, express well enough, explain well enough, so you guys can always raise your queries. Am I audible? So I don't know, like most of you, I see only very few students, responding here in this group. There are approximately 53 students present as of now. My concern is that because you guys are not physically present here, I'm worried whether you guys are listening to me. It's always better to interject and ask me questions than just passively sit there and listen. You should always have confusions that you need to clarify. And in another idea, another, basically what I assume in my head is that some of you might not even be there. If that is the case, that is also very dangerous for you, as I said. Okay, because you have to follow every class. You might think that sir is uploading these lectures anyway, so I'll watch them later on. So believe it, later on, as they pile up, is going to be difficult, and you might come across some confusions. Then I will have difficulties in explaining. So Because of that, I'm asking you guys to interact as well as listen to what I'm saying. Another, I have a selfish motive in that as well, and the selfish motive is that, I might misspeak something. Might have misunderstood something. Students are the right person, like right, uh, you know, subject here to, like right persons here to point that out to me. You guys always have the most, innovative ideas. We are getting old, so we have our mind is already getting rigid. So you are the ones to I ask the right questions. So I have one question here, sir. What were those two words, lex, that you used? So Disha, do not worry about those words, because when we discuss Thomas Aquinas, that we will very soon, I will be explaining those terms to you. But if you want to know what those terms are, the first one is lex aeterna, lex aeterna, Aeterna, lex aeterna. That is eternal law, and then you have lex naturalis. Okay, that is known as natural law, and then you have called lex divine. Okay, so sorry, you have something called lex divina, that is, the laws as are revealed through scriptures, and then you have another kind of law, that is lex human, basically laws made by humans. Just a second, I think I'll have to pick up the call quickly. হ্যালো, হ্যাঁ সাহিল বলো, এই তো ক্লাসে ক। না না, ক ক কুইকলি। হ্যাঁ হ্যাঁ, ক্লাসের পরে তাহলে ফোন করি। হ্যাঁ হ্যাঁ হ্যাঁ। Hello, am I audible? Students, am I audible? Okay, okay. So where was I? I lost track for a while. Uh, oh yes, yes. So yeah, so one of you asked me about those different names. So anyway, don't worry. I will explain them in greater detail later on, in when we discuss about Thomas Aquinas later on. So yes, so that's essentially the two different theories within nature law. One is nature law legal theory, and the other one is nature law moral theory. So they are both within the domain of nature law inquiry. Quite often they overlap, and there are many other thinkers in whose analysis they do not overlap. Essentially, the legal theory does not overlap with the moral theory. So that's what I was trying to explain earlier. So far we all agree that natural law, the essential feature of natural law is that they are universal. Okay, universal in the sense that no matter where you are, spatially, okay, they'll be same. They are unchanging. That essentially mean that no matter in what time you are, they will be the same. They will not change. If they change, they are not objective. Hence, they are everlasting. You cannot change them, so they are immutable. They cannot be changed via exercise of sovereign will or collective will. So because they are eternal, and they do not depend on conventions or other historical factors. So that's essentially what natural law is all about. Okay, so that's the moral content of that's the moral aspect of the natural law. Now so far, if the idea of natural law is clear, let's also look at different sources of natural law. Okay, different sources of natural law. Now sources will also be much clearer when we discuss about them in specific context. But for now, just for the sake of introduction, so what is that? That there are four essential sources, that we can all agree on for now. Okay, four main sources of natural law. The first and most important source of that is the one that I explained earlier, that you find it from the things, from the nature of the world around you. Okay, you find it from the nature of the world around you. Okay, so this approach is also known as the teleological approach. Okay, this approach is also known as the teleological approach. That it says that there is a cosmic order. Okay, so we when we look at the world, okay, at any specific moment, we may find lots of disorder, chaos. Okay, yeah, but then according to those thinkers, of Greco-Roman period, for example, you had Aristotle. Okay, for them, they thought that there was a eternal cosmic order. Okay, and they derived their natural law, their ideas of natural law from those cosmic order. Okay, so you probably have heard about Aristotle and his idea of virtue, excellence. Okay, so what does that mean? Okay, when we talk about virtue or excellence in terms of what? So excellence for them would always be in terms of something ideal that they picture. Okay, so for example, this thing that I have in my hand, does it look squarish to you, or does it look rectangular to you? It's spherical, isn't it? Spherical. But then you see, if I bring it close to the camera, you see that it's not really that spherical. There are certain, here it goes a little high up, and then here. So it's like that. So it's not perfect sphere. But then can we not imagine a perfect sphere? Yes, we can. So that perfect sphere would be the excellent sphere. Okay. So this is their idea of, silly example. Okay, this is their idea of excellence, virtue. Okay, so their idea of natural law was basically dependent on that our public life and else other things. In that also we can achieve excellence, virtue. Okay, so it is quite an optimistic way of defining what is the right thing to do. Okay, and very interesting as well. Okay, so they would say that it's our purpose to achieve that excellence. Okay, so based on that idea of excellence that they conceive, okay, they will then decide what is the right thing to do and what is the wrong thing to do. So that's one of the approaches in natural law school. So you derive what is morally right and what is morally wrong. That is the natural law, the content of natural law, from an eternal cosmic order. Okay, the approach is also known as teleological approach. Okay, so was I clear in explaining that? Was I clear enough? Was I able to explain it well enough? But then problem arises, okay, as when it comes to defining what is excellent. Okay, so you might have heard about Plato and his idea of a philosopher king. Okay, and the problems associated with that. So we'll discuss that in greater detail later on. Okay, so that's the first source. Okay, the next source of natural law, as it also historically emerged subsequently, is that law comes from God. Okay, law comes from God. So they are also known as the theologists. Okay, these were the theologists. Okay, who gave a particular definition of natural law, and hence this is the theological approach to natural law. Okay, so they also had something to say. So for them, they do not deny that we are to derive moral propositions from certain higher orders, okay? But then who creates those orders, okay? Those cosmic orders. It cannot be without anyone creating that. So who could that creator be? Well, that creator will be God. Your answer then, voila. So where do we get natural law from? Then it must be from the command of the God, not from humans, because humans will have this or that to say. That will be subjective, relativistic. But the command of God will be universal for all. So that's why they say that um, the morality of your action will depend on whether it is in accordance with what the God commands you to do or abstain from doing. So that's another approach. So that essentially the implication of that will be that, okay, why should I not commit murder? Because in the Ten Commandments, God has revealed that thou shalt not kill. But what if God said that you can kill? Then will it be morally right for you to kill them? If you study about biblical scriptures, then you see that quite often God instructs others being killed. But then I'm not just talking. Here's the thing, okay? Whether you subscribe to the Abrahamic religious texts or things or not doesn't depend on that, okay? This approach essentially means that there is someone with agency, okay? Someone with higher agency. It doesn't have to be Abrahamic God who quite often people call as Yahweh or Allah or whatever, okay? It's not that. It doesn't have to be that. Even if you do not subscribe to that, you might have any other concept of God, whatever it is. But in certain other religion, it's problematic. Okay, so for example, in Hinduism, it's problematic in the sense that who is the boss of them all? Okay, so that's if there are many different gods and they have many different things to say, then we again go into moral relativism. So the problem is, so this thing was essentially dealt with by that only. But then in Hindu philosophy, there is this idea of cosmic order that will be independent of all these subjective gods. So that is more in line with with the Greco-Roman philosophy than what the theologists had to say. Anyway, the theologists basically what they said is that okay, yeah, fine, cosmic order, this and that, but then who created that? It cannot be without an agency according to them. There are reasons why they say so. We will discuss about that later on when we discuss about Thomas Aquinas, and we will also discuss about the fallacies in their reasoning. So essentially what they did is that they said that okay, the moral content of your action, the moral propositions, as well as the natural law, is to be derived from God. Okay, what the God commands you to do or not do. Okay, so that's the theological approach. Okay, now theological approach then didn't survive for too long because of the fact that there were disagreements within Europe. Okay, with the reformations happening, and then scientific the discoveries and happening, there were like conflicts between the ideas propagated by the church and the changes, reformations, developments happening within the society. And then, gradually Europeans also started moving elsewhere, and then, many of them came across, ideas of gods that were not the kind of gods that they believed in. Okay, now if they were to impose certain idea of higher law on these people, they cannot go there and then say that okay, you ought to do this because our God says so, because they don't believe in your God. So what will you then do? And so law is then the natural law is then command of the God will not be of much help to you. So apart from there are many other reasons. This is just one reason. Okay. For other like societal changes as well, it was no longer enough to say that something is wrong or right because the church says so, because God doesn't come and say this. At the end of the day, it's said through the church. Okay, so these ideas of natural law started gradually to lose its sheen, okay, its glory. Okay, so you still need a natural law, but it cannot be based on what the theologists say. So now they essentially where the new philosophers were essentially trying to find a foundation for natural law, which is secular in nature. Okay, it doesn't have to be about God. In fact, even God now will be bound by certain principles. Okay, certain principles, or at least they will say that God is so perfect that God will not do, or God cannot do that which is immoral. Okay, so you need a natural law school, which natural law theory, which is quite neutral in its approach, secular in its approach. Okay, so it was essentially based on certain natural requirements of life. Okay, that we are born with certain vulnerabilities, that I'm not impenetrable. Okay, I'm not unbreakable, I'm vulnerable. So that means my life needs certain protections. Okay, so from that, okay, because of all those factors, okay, we can say that we are bound by certain law that makes it possible for vulnerable human beings to mutually coexist. Okay, so that's another approach that evolved within natural law. So your natural requirements of life, okay, that itself leads us to certain laws. Okay, and they are higher in importance than any other law, and hence they are also considered as natural law. So that's the third source, and then came the fourth source, basically in the works of John Finnis, okay, and certain other thinkers, okay, and for them, these virtues that we talk about, these are not something that you derive from something else. Okay, they are self-evident. Okay, they are self-evident. Okay, in the absence of any other corrupting factors, if you think about them, you will know that okay, these are the requirements. Okay, so these are the contents of natural law. Okay, and for us to come to any right conclusion about how we ought to live our life, okay, for that matter, how the government ought to govern you and what are the proper laws ought to be enacted, that will be based on something called practical reasoning. Okay, something called practical reason, and then the government will try and achieve common good uh, amongst us. Okay, by employing practical reason, they will try to arrive at something called common good. Okay, so that's the fourth approach to natural law. So these are the four different sources of natural law. Now, don't get worried about them at this stage, because I try to explain them in a very short time, in a very like haphazard, fast manner. But then, as long as I'm successful in conveying the basic meanings of these different sources, ideas behind these different sources to you, then it will be easier for me to talk about them in greater detail when we take up specific thinkers. So with that, I would like to conclude, but before I go, I want to ask you again that whether I was clear in explaining the last few points. Has there been any confusion, anything that was not clear enough? You can either unmute and ask, or you can drop a message here. Am I audible? Are you guys there? Okay, so if it is clear, then thank you for joining the class. I will upload the video on YouTube, and then I will share the link. Tomorrow I will distribute the topic, then introduce the Greek nature law school. Thank you then. Good day.